talk about deploying using Xcopy. That'll be very short. Then deploying using Azure, which is always fun, and deploying your application in Framework 4.5. And we'll take questions throughout, so type your questions into Jill and we'll talk about them. Hopefully each one will talk about that particular type during that section. Deploying using Xcopy. If you've ever been to our Crash Course webinar, this is what we do every week in the Crash Course webinar. I'm just going to summarize it briefly because it's what you use to quick and easy send an application to a server. You just copy the entire application to the server, usually using FTP. If you're on an internal network, you can use your network copy, and then you can make a zip file and make the transfer even simpler. When it gets to your server, then you configure you extract it and configure your IIS application to point at it. We're going to have an example today. This is from our Crash Course. We have at our IronSpeed website, ironspeed.com/crash course. Right now it's a static page advertising our Crash Course. You can look at that because in just a second I'm going to go to my web server. This is my IronSpeed web server here on our internal network and also facing out there where you see our website. Well, on that website we'll have the application which I created for the last Crash Course, and it's available in the sample applications folder along with the source for the page that you're currently viewing. My app is the page. Here, well, let's look at it quick. It's just the index page that you're seeing for the Crash Course application. Now, we have also My App 7. This is in our IronSpeed Designer application, one we build every week. So we'll open up our IIS Manager. Remember, the My App 7 has been sent over here on a zip file and reconstituted to be the full IronSpeed application with an embedded database. Since the Access database is used, since it's a file database, it has to be inside of the application. Once that's done and you have your folder, all you have to do is go to your website. Here we have the website for Crash Course. And if we want to manage that application and look at its advanced settings, it's simply a matter of changing the physical path of the application so that it now becomes My App 7. And it will now point to our IronSpeed Designer application. So I forgot to keep it on, and now try it. Once you've done that, let's try the application just to make sure everything was all right and that I don't have any permissions not set. This should be good because the permissions for the internal files were all set last week when I did the Crash Course. But let's talk about Xcopy because in development mode, Xcopy is probably the easiest way to make changes to your application. You can change just a few things, FTP over a couple of files. So once you get an Xcopy deployment set up so that it works on between your development machine and your server, it's terribly easy to actually try your application in the development environment, in the production environment. And there you notice the startup delay. This is a website application, so it has to compile on the fly, so there's always the startup delay the first time. But now, and so if we'll go back, let's leave this here. Whoops, not that one. Need to go to my remote desktop and go back to my machine where we have the Crash Course page. Now, if we refresh that page, we'll no longer have the static page, but the application itself. You can play with this if you want. It'll be changed later. Meanwhile, What you've seen there is Xcopy deployment, what I use most of the time doing development and testing. And so now, I guess I don't see any questions about that. It is pretty simple once you get it going. So let's talk about deploying your application to Azure. First, we create the website in Azure, and then we configure it. That's just a broad brush of the strokes. Actually, I've found in dealing with Azure that probably some of the hardest part is something we can't do anything about in this webinar, and that is just getting logged in and to the right place. But once we're there, we have our Azure website. We create an Azure website, and it will give you instructions on where to FTP your application. And then once you've done that and configured it, you can browse it. We'll take a look at doing that in our, let's see, first of all, we connect to the Azure portal. I'm already connected, and we'll get there in just a minute. Once you get to the portal, once you get to the Azure site, you want to go to your portal. And so now we'll select the subscription, create a new website. We're going to do this in just a minute. And then edit the application using configure, and then you can browse to the default application and find out where your publishing details are, and then once you do that, you can FTP your publishing. There are other methods of connecting or sending things to the Azure website. I'm just going to use FTP. I always like the simplest methods, but you can use ones with more machinery if you want. Azure supports several. And we'll take questions. So let's go to our Azure website. Here's our Azure site. The first thing I want to do is look at the subscription, just limit it to the subscriptions that I want. So my free trial subscription, here we go, Windows Azure QA. That's not the one I want. Let's look at the other one. Let's look at them all to be sure. Azure provides many things besides hosting. The two most friendly I've found for the casual user is both their websites and their SQL databases. Both can be very handy, and they don't take much in the way of the extra planning and organizing that goes with starting a new paradigm. And our Azure's acting kind of slowly today, and that will happen. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about that, except maybe put a server in their server farm, which is not going to happen. Well, let's stop that and do it again. No, I didn't really want to do that. That's okay. Let's go to Azure. And it's going to make it very easy for me by being busy all day. Well, you know what about Mr. Murphy. So what do we got here? Windows Azure. We're still logged in. Let's go to our portal. And here I have the application I've prepared, and let's just look at it. Let's go to our IronSpeed Designer. Let's leave our Azure portal up and go to our IronSpeed Designer. Let's look at our recent application. This is the one I prepared, which is just a simple Southwind database. Now, the database is already included in the application itself. Remember, with an Access database, you'll need it included in the application. And if we run it, we'll see that our website works here on my local machine in development server just fine. To make sure it's running in development server, I didn't check first. Always assumed, and that's not a good idea. In my build menu, I'm running using development server. So we'll now send that same application over to Azure and go back to our Windows Azure. Now to create a website, this is the one that we have that's already running. Let's do, I did a test yesterday and I forgot to delete it, so let's do another one. They're very easy. Let's create a new website. First of all, let me stop that. Make sure you're on the web apps because you don't want to create any of the other pieces. Let's create a new website, and all you have to do is quick create, give it a URL that is unlikely to be used by anybody else, which is sometimes a challenge. Where you want to put it, which subscription you're using, and create it. It's that easy. It will be created shortly. Once you've created an application, while this one is creating, it takes a minute or two. While this one's creating, let's look at the other one. Once we get our created application, you'll see the side view here where there are some very interesting things, including download the publishing profile. We'll need this publishing profile to figure out where to send our information for our website. We'll also want to configure our website to make sure it's running with the right framework. Let's just look at configure. See, this is a framework 3.5. You can have in Azure 3.5 or 4.5. Don't send a 4.0 application up there. It won't work. We don't use PHP. We don't use Java. You can check the rest of the configurations, but pretty much this is it. That's all you have to make sure of in most iron speed applications. Back to our dashboard. And once we get our application, let's take a look. Here, our application has been created. It's all ready. So we can look at the publishing profile for it. Publishing profile, let's save it into our, and we get a file with a published settings. So we're going to have ISD test 2. I'm going to put that in my deployment webinar folder. And go look at it. And there's really two things you want to do here. You want to find out which profile you want to use. We're using FTP today, I said, so we'll go to FTP. We'll find the published profile for FTP, and then we can look at some of the things we'll need. Here's the URL of your application, and just to test that, let's see what the application, whoops, that's the application, sorry, that's the FTP location of the application. And we're going to have a username and a password. That'll be very hard to guess. And your application URL. So this is where we're going to find our application. You can see it right now. Let's just go there. And of course, it comes up and shows you the holding page for the application. Well, we had the same thing with our other application, the one I did yesterday, I'm not going to actually FTP something to here because I already did exactly the same thing, created the application and put it into my app 6. So my app 6 has already been FTP'd, which will take a little longer with Azure, so I don't want to waste the time. We basically created an FTP profile, used the host that came out of the published profile, the username that came out of the published profile, and that ridiculously long password that came out of the published profile. And once we do that, we can connect to our website. And we have right now, here is the website on Azure. It has to be in www.root on your Azure website, and you can send your IronSpeed application there, and you'll be good to go. Because once you do, let's see, I've got a couple of questions. Good, we can talk about questions. This is pretty much it. I've summarized what I can. We didn't do a couple of the steps because FTP takes too long. But I want to go to my Azure website for my app 6 and see if indeed it's still running. And while we're waiting for that, here's our website, and here's the website as it is running on Azure. Bill, you didn't mention creating deployment packages before Xcopy. Isn't that required? No, it isn't, Chris. Xcopy is designed to be really simple. You can run your entire website. The inefficiency in that is that IronSpeed creates a whole lot of extra files which are for taking care of housekeeping and making sure we know all about your application, and for continuing to work with your application as you go forward. You don't need those files, XML files in particular, but you don't need any of those files to run your website. But if you don't worry about sorting them out and you don't want to impose another third-party application, the deployment, which is basically a Microsoft build. If you don't want to impose anything in between, you want to have your raw website and you want to work with it on your server, then Xcopy is perfect for that because you just take the whole thing. You don't have to think about it, what's in it or what's not in it. You know that the whole thing is there. You know there's a lot extra, and you don't have to worry about it. These days, I find myself doing that a lot. If I make changes on my development machine to just one of the many ASPX pages in my ISD application, can I then just Xcopy the files for that ASPX page to my production server? Indeed, that's why I like Xcopy and websites. Now, you have to do that with a website. If you have a web application, and I'm presuming you all know the difference in your configuration of your site. You can have a website or a web application, but if you have a web application, that's pre-compiled and it runs from the compiled files. If that's the case, then you have to rebuild it and send over the compiled files which were changed containing your ASPX page. If I can, where and what are the files that are related to the ASPX page that are changed? Are they all found inside the folder for that page? John, yes, that's the first thing. If you didn't really change anything except the ASPX page, then in the designer UI, then I would just simply copy all the files for that page. There are a few. Let's just take a look at any application, in particular the last one we have. This is the one that's running on my web server here in IronSpeed. This is a website and not a web application. So for a website, if I wanted to change, say, one of my customers' files, if I change the edit customer, I just send these 3 files over. You don't need the XML file actually, but I'd send these 2 files over. And in a website, the app code for it too. Remember, you have a code behind file that's in the app code folder. So you send that over, and then you should be able to see changes. The general protocol on a on any web application is once IIS detects that or not IIS, yes, IIS detects that a file has changed, then it will reload the file. If I can, where and what other files are they all found inside the folder? Yes, they are. Do you know if there's something specific to ISD that restricts .NET 4 apps on Azure, or is that just a general restriction from Azure regarding .NET 4? That was an unpleasant restriction I found in Azure when I tried to put a .NET 4 website there. There's nothing in ISD that restricts it, but apparently Azure only supports the 3.5 framework or 4.5 framework, which is okay. 4.5 framework is great. So if you want to go past 3.5, then make your application a 4.5 framework application. What is the app you are using to transfer FTP into Azure? This is one I've had for a long time. It is called a Core FTP. You can search for that on the internet. They have a free version. This is the paid version. I believe in paying for good software I use, and this is one of those things. And so I use this all the time. There are lots of websites here, but you could use the Microsoft FTP that comes with Windows. You could use any FTP that will do for you what you want. I just happen to like this one. Xcopy compare RoboCopy, which better for copy application? Ben, Xcopy is a term. You know, Xcopy is a Windows command you can use in the command line to copy a whole bunch of files. You can't really use the Xcopy command in Windows to deploy your application. We call it Xcopy deployment because basically it takes the entire folder and shoves the whole thing wherever you want it to go. You need some form of FTP or network copy. We use RoboCopy also. RoboCopy is, I don't even remember where I got it from. It's been around so long, but we use it in building things. I really don't have any preferences one way or the other. RoboCopy is a little utility. Xcopy is a great utility. We use Xcopy in our scripts all the time. Can you give an example of extra files that are not necessary to run the web app that can be excluded in deployment? Well, as I said, Hassan, let's just take a look. Kill my FTP. Take a look at our application. Most of the XML files, and I think that's it pretty much. The other files, any of the language files, this one is done in VB, or you could also have C# files, but all the language files you'll need, the folders, they're there for a reason and you need them. The JavaScript files, certainly, your solution files you don't need to run an application. And that's about it, I think. If you really want to know what files you need, then as one of the first question was about why didn't you do a deployment folder? Well, do yourself a deployment. Just make a deployment folder using the deployment wizard. You know, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. We haven't done it yet, but you know, you can go to the tools and the deployment wizard, and you can make a deployment folder, and that's what you want to do. See what's in the deployment folder, and you'll be able to figure it out. Is it possible to convert a .NET 4 to .NET 5 using ISD? Well, only if if the application is built in ISD. You can't take any .NET application, put it into ISD, and have it do anything meaningful because there's too much infrastructure involved in ISD that it has to know about that it can't create from scratch on a That's why you create the applications in IronSpeed Designer. Keep them in IronSpeed Designer. It knows everything about the application. You can do things with it. If you get outside of IronSpeed Designer, yeah, well, okay, well, that's good. If you're using ISD apps, yes, very definitely. And actually, that's one thing I did. Let's just show you how easy it is. I'll go to my application. I happen to be looking at here. This is the application. This is the application that's built in Application Wizard. I'm using the Application Wizard on the app called My App 6. This is the 3.5 app. If I want to change that to be 4.5, and indeed I have the 4.5 framework on my machine, then all I do is change it to 4.5 and go ahead and change it. Now, one of the other things, actually that's what I've already done, and I did this earlier with this application to use it to do the next stage of deployment, which is the 4.5 framework deployment. But in doing that, you'll also want to change it to a web application pre-compiled because the IIS, or not IIS, it's the Microsoft build that doesn't handle turning websites into deployment packages. It handles it fine for web applications, and so we make a web application out of it. So you can do both, and if you try and do both, watch what will happen here. Let's see what it says to me. Usually in things like changing framework or changing the application type, the application type and framework cannot be changed at the same time. IronSpeed wants to change those particulars one at a time. So we'll put it back to a website, put it to the 4.5 framework, and then just finish our application. You can see it will move a lot of things. And so if you're using third-party controls or other things, you'll have to readjust them. And we'll say, yes, this doesn't have anything special. I haven't customized anything, so this will go just by itself. When we get finished, we'll have a 4.5 framework application. And when we get the 4.5 framework application, which is going to run just to show you it can, because I have that set in my designer. Scratch this, see. And so there now our application is running in the 4.5 framework. Let's see what this guy, let's get rid of a few of these. So this is another development server one I don't want. This is my one running on Azure. And this is my Azure, and this is, of course, my crash course page. So let's go back to, actually, we were looking at our application. We've got it now in the 4.5 framework, and so to complete my preparation, I want to take that, open the application wizard again, configure it this time. I want to make sure it's a web application. So this will complete transferring it to both the 4.5 framework and a web application. And again, I'm switching application structures. It will make the standard, make sure your application is back up, and I will reinforce that with, I do it all the time, and whenever you're developing, just remember to snapshot your application. The easiest thing in the world with the storage space we have these days, there's no excuse for not just going to your application, highlighting it, hit Control-C, Control-V, and make a snapshot of it. You can start renaming your snapshots so you can keep track of them. But in any event, anytime you're going to do something which you think might mess up your application or you're not sure of, be sure to snapshot it. And so now we've got the same thing, and now we've got the application here running in the 4.5 framework as a web application. Okay. I just used Control-C and Control-V to copy all files. Seems to work okay. Yes, it does. It's a slow go sometimes. The copy takes as much. 30 minutes? Well, John, I don't know what you, that's interesting. Unless you're using a very, very large website, but even large files. I've copied large, relatively big sites with just local copy. Don't understand the 30 minutes. It's not practical at 30 minutes. If it doesn't happen in a minute or two, then I put it in the realm of not practical. You got to find something else to do because you don't want to waste that much time. I use it all the time because it only takes seconds on the smaller websites we generally work with in order to test things. If you use Dropbox, you can actually keep the folder contents on your development machine and on your production server completely synchronized. That's a good idea. Actually, we use Dropbox for some other things, but that's not a bad idea. Just to be sure to use a special folder on your production server to hold the synchronized copy. Then just copy from the special folder to the production IIS folder when you are ready to deploy the new release. Excellent tip, John, and I'm going to save that one and give it to people again. Hope you don't have it copyrighted. But what John is talking about is just keeping it on Dropbox, synchronizing to Dropbox, and then putting it to deploy it to your application. You'll do what we do in a lot of our web servers, and there's one other tool that I found very handy, and that is you put it in a test folder and then you check and see if, let me go to my deployment. Here we go. Here's my training folder where I have my applications, and we have MyApp 6, and we have the MyApp 6 we talked about, and we have the MyApp 6 that's been prepared previously for 4.5. Well, we just did this one too. So let's compare these two. And I have a tool called Beyond Compare on here, which I can simply look at the two, see what's different, and then if I want to move from one to the other, you just look. Bin files we expect to be different. This one has the debugging files because I compiled it in debugging mode. Of course, the binary DLLs will always be different, but all the rest of the files are the same. So you notice that the changing it to the 4.5 framework today worked out pretty much the same as yesterday. Anyway, the point I was making to add to John's excellent comment was that you'll need a tool to take it from your preparation directory into the actual, over the actual deployment folder. And once you have that, that's an excellent scheme. Does one need Visual Studio 2013 to create the deployment package for the 4.5 framework? Or will I be able to use Visual Studio 2010 to create the deployment package? If you're starting to work in Framework 4.5, you should use Visual Studio 2012 or 2013, and I recommend 2013. There isn't that much difference between them, and 2013 is a little more mature, I think. Anyway, yes. Can you explain the advantages, disadvantages of web app versus website? Websites are not precompiled. You basically take the files and you put them there, and as IIS serves them, it precompiles them. And once it precompiles them, it caches them, so if your website is in use, then it has things ready to go if it's used once in a while. If it isn't used very infrequently, the first time you encounter a website, you'll end up waiting a little, and you saw that on ours. You see that the first time it takes a little while. After that, the pages come up right away. A web application, it's compiled ahead of time. Let's take a look at the difference here. Here's my, well, this is, I don't have that. Let's take my app 6. This is a 3.5 website application, and we're going to compare that with the 4.5 application that I prepared for doing my deployment. Notice there's no app code folder in the Framework 4.5 because all of the code behind files are included with the files themselves. Let's look at the category. You see the code behind files are included in here. Also in the bin folder, you'll see that there are no DLLs compiled for the application in the website. In the web application, you have all the DLLs pre-compiled, and this is what it runs from. This and your ASPX files are what the application runs from. And that's the, I guess, the biggest summary, the biggest difference between the two of them. The application for compare folder. That's the one I was using. I told you about it. That's another paid tool. You'll have to pay for it. Actually, I think they have a free trial version, but I wouldn't get it. I've used this one for years, and I pay for every upgrade because it is just the greatest application since sliced bread. It's called Beyond Compare. If you go search on the website for Beyond Compare, you'll find their website. Try them out. If you need a good comparison tool, that's it. Okay, thanks for the questions. That's a good start. Now we're going on to the last part, and here's the most contentious part, I think, in deployment. You know, between Visual Studio 2010 and Visual Studio 2012, Microsoft changed the way you can deploy your application. In the 3.5 framework and in the 4.0 framework, you can deploy your applications creating an MSI file. This is a file that you install on the web server, and it installs your application. We really used to like that, but now in the Framework 4.5 and in Visual Studio 2012 and 2013, Microsoft changed their deployment protocol. They don't provide MSI files anymore. They provide deployment folders and deployment packages. So we're going to close this application. I'm going to go to the recent application. I have my Framework 4.5 version of my app 6, and I have that here. Now, let's see, we've had 2 deployments so far. We've had the deployment to our server, so you saw the basic 3.5 website deployed on our server, which is still running in our crash course page. And then we have our Microsoft Azure. We created that, and it's running here on the Azure website that was created for it. So now we've got one more, and unfortunately this one you're not going to be able to see in your local browser because I'm going to have to do it on my server, and my server doesn't have a path to the internet, but we'll check the URL anyway. Let's go to our application. We've got our My App 6, and we want to deploy it. So we'll go to Tools, Deployment Wizard. And we're going to create a deployment folder. Now this is remember, a 4.5 web application. So we're going to create a deployment folder. And all we need is to do it locally here on this machine. It's going to be put right next to where the application is. The application is, remember, My App 6 Framework 4.5. It's going to create a deploy folder right next to it and put our package there. Let's go next. Tells you what it's going to do, which is not quite accurate for what we're going to do with it, but it's a good summary. And now it will run through, finish, and it created the deployment folder. That's all there is to it. You can take the 4.5 framework application, create a deployment folder for it. Let's go back to our deployment folder. Here we are. Here's our application. And now here's our deployment folder. So let's see what's in our deployment. Well, our deployment folder isn't anything like our application folder, is it? It has simply a few files. In particular, the zip file here contains all of your application. So let's go back to our slides. Whoops, slides. And talk about deploying the application to Framework 4.5. First, you have to update the app to the web application, and I did that. I showed you that. Make sure, again, since we're dealing with an Access database, if you're using an SQL database, I really like SQL Azure databases. Use those, and then all you need is your connection string. Your connection string works wherever it is, and you don't have to worry about it. But we're using Azure, or we're using Access, so we have to make sure that the database is included within the application itself. Use the deployment wizard to create a deployment folder. You just saw me do that. Then we'll use IIS Manager on the server to import the folder, and that's the last step of the 4.5 framework. We'll talk about some of the shortcomings I've encountered later, but so we use the deployment folder, deployment wizard, you saw this, Here we use the deployment wizard and get our deployment folder. We've got our deployment folder, so then we're going to go to IIS. Well, first of all, just let's look at what we've got. Remember, I showed you that the contents don't look nearly the same, and to reinforce that, we'll take this is the application we created the deployment folder for. So if we compare that to what we got for a deployment folder, you'll see all of this has been compressed into this. And that's your deployment package, they call it now. So with the deployment package, we will go to our IIS. First of all, we'll take the deployment package and we'll send it to our web server. Well, our web server in this case happens to be my own machine. I have IIS on this machine, so I can serve applications for our local network. If you were on our local network, you could see it, but it won't serve it outside because of our firewall. Anyway, you go to your IIS, and then you import the application into IIS. And the import steps will look somewhat like this. We find the zip file. We just go through the deployment. It'll give you an application path, and then it should say it deployed it successfully. And then browse the application. So let's go do that with ours. We got a couple more questions. Good. We're going to have lots of things to talk about. What we always do after this. In MyApp 6, we've got our deployment. So let's go to our IIS Manager. And here's the website structure on my local machine. I have a couple of websites. I have my default website, which happens to be duplicate of our corporate website or some parts of our, and I don't have anything else. I have no other applications here in my default website. So let's go to my default website and let's import an application for deployment. In the deploy menu, we find import the application. Remember, we've created our deployment package already, so all we have to do is find our deployment package. And we'll find that on my C drive in my training folder in my deploy, and here we have my app deploy. In here is our zip file for the MyApp 6. Once we do that, all these are fine. We don't need to change anything. it's going to deploy it to a folder called myapp6 deploy. We can change that later if you want, but right now I'm just going to leave it like that. And it's just showing you the connection string that's already in the web config. You've chosen to install the package to an existing application. That's because I deployed it yesterday. I removed the website here, but I didn't remove the file. So just append the files. Just delete all extra files and folders. Let's have it overwrite the thing completely. And it was successfully installed. Once I do that, you notice now I have myapp6 here. And if I look at my application, I don't need to do anything more than import it and run it. And there's my application. Now from the URL, you see it's not running a development server. It's running on my local host, myapp6, the same as all the other myapp6 I have running up here. So that's what we've got running. And that's all there is. The trouble is that I have to actually be able to get on my web server and run IIS Manager to do that. Now, well, let's see what the questions are. Any gotchas for deploying RESTful? Deploying RESTful is a different thing, and actually I'd say I haven't actually deployed a RESTful application with this, so I can't tell you about the gotcha specifically what they are. I do know you've got a little more complication with RESTful because you've got, not only have you got the web server, but you've also got your data server. So don't have any advice for you there. Pay attention to the online help because we're trying to make that cover the issues. I know websites and web apps are different, but which one is faster? Well, definitely for the first time you're ever accessing a web application is faster because it's already pre-compiled, comes up right away, doesn't have the delay at startup that you see. However, that if a website is used frequently during the day, you don't ever notice that because it's always cached. And the one time it happens is just people chalk up to, oh, slow internet right now. But definitely I would think that web applications overall are faster because it doesn't have to do the compilation at IIS. Is there a way to exclude the web config file from deployment? When we move our app to production, we always go in and manually switch it. Interesting. Not that I know of. Your web config file is part of your application. If you have changes you want to make on your production server, Jake, I assume that's why you're doing it. It makes a lot of sense. You change them there only on your production server. I just keep a copy out and part of deploying it. Remember, I think it was John that gave me that nice tip about just copying it to a preparation directory first, and then syncing the preparation directory with your actual server directory that serves the application. I do it that way and just include as part of preparing the directory, writing in the new web config. Okay. Got a clarification which says, sorry, should have specified that the app points to the test server during development. Ah, yes. Then when moved to production, we switch the database pointer. Yeah, you switch the connection string. Makes perfect sense. And to do that, you know, you might be able to find the 4.5 deployment allows you to change your connection string, but for simplicity, I don't see anything wrong with the scheme that you're using, and so you can look for a way to automate it perfectly. Nothing comes immediately to mind because that's such a small step that I would immediately make it a part of deploying the application to switch connection strings, which you've already done and seems fine to me. Yeah. The problem is the connection string in the web config. You always have to swap out the connection string. That's exactly right. And I just keep that as a part of your permanent checklist of, okay, make sure the application's there, make sure the web config is updated. So this form of deployment requires that your application is a web application, not a website. Yes, that's correct. A website, you can do it, but then you have to use Visual Studio manually to on your own machine to prepare the deployment package. And it's just too messy. It's not messy, but it's another step, and who wants another step? You use IIS Manager to copy website from Azure to PC? Okay, let's see. Let's see if I understand. You use IIS Manager to copy website from Azure to PC, and then need to, well, yeah, there were, to make it clear what happened, Azure has nothing to do with IIS Manager. I don't get to run IIS Manager on Azure. IIS Manager is on my my web server for my Framework 4.5 application, or on my 3.5 application. I'm dealing with servers, my own servers. I run IIS Manager to make sure that the application is configured correctly. On the 4.5 application, this is the one we're looking at here, running on my local machine. I used IIS Manager, first of all, to go to the website and deploy and import my application. Now remember, I'm on the same machine. Now, I could have FTP'd it to a different machine and been on a different machine, but I don't have another one running the 4.5 framework that goes external to our firewall. So I might as well do it here and show it to you here. So I'm on the same machine, but logically, yes, I could be on a different server. I need to have my deployment package put on that server. Remember, the deployment package is in my deploy folder. It's these files, the biggest one of which is the zip file, which is what it looks for. These are for other things. You can look at the README text and see what's available, but this is what you're looking for. We put this on our server. The server happens to be the machine I created it on. But at this point, I use IIS Manager to import that into our website. It creates the www root folder and then brings the whole application in. So that's what happens there. If you go to import an application in IIS, will it give you the option to alter all connection strings included in the web config if you have multiple? That's a good question. I haven't tested that. And I don't know what the answer is. So you'll, and like everything else with Iron Speed Designer, it's okay. Try it quick. This test is not difficult to do. It does require you to have IIS on your local machine like I have here. That wasn't difficult either. So if you have a machine, your development machine, which has IIS on it, which you should for testing anyway, then go ahead and try it and see what it does. You mentioned Beyond Compare. Do you know offhand if Beyond Compare has an API? This would allow for comparing files programmatically. I have never used that, and I don't know. Would make sense if they did, but again, I really don't know. So, but I know where you can find out, the Beyond Compare website. All I know is I've been dealing with them for years, and I wouldn't use anything else. My VSP has 3 websites. IIS won't let me import 4.5 to the www root. Interesting. Oh, VSP. Okay. I always end up having to fake a folder, then copy the files to final destination. That's really interesting. Not sure what you mean by VSP, but I'm thinking it's a different web server arrangement. The trouble with deploying the 4.5 applications is that you generally are working with somebody who's hosting your website, and it's not your own company and where you have access to things or can get access to things from IT department. And so then you have to work with the people who are hosting your website in order to be able to get the access to do the things. Some of them may have automated importing, some of them may have other schemes. You have to work with the scheme that you're given by the hosting company. That's why I haven't tried any of those things. There are so many combinations that we can't do that in an hour webinar. Virtual private server. I have not tried virtual private server. Don't know anything about it, but if it's a, well, I guess there are too many what ifs for me to say much. It doesn't sound right that it won't let you import it into, well, www-root. Remember, our application didn't go to www-root. Let's see where it went. If we look at my IIS manager here, and we look at my application, and we manage it, and look at my advanced settings, you can see that my application is actually in, this is my corporate website, which happens to be the default application for my IIS here on this machine. So it went into my app 6 deploy. And in my app 6 deploy, let's see. Sorry about that. Cancel. Let's explore it. And here we have this. So where we saw www-root was the name we used, that was used in the Azure website, but that's not what we're talking about. So I don't know why your VPS doesn't work correctly. I'm sure there's a reason, but I don't know it. Once you imported the zipped deployment file to the deployment server using the production server IIS, how do you change the connection string in the web config? Okay. If this is any other, well, on my machine, how do I change the web config? That's very easy. I go to my application. We saw where it was. Where's my, let's see, corporate website, my app 6 deploy. Here's my web config. Change anything I want. It's on my machine. Likewise, if we're at our Azure website over here, if we're looking at our Azure website, in Azure, I can, again, use FTP. So I can get up a new web config file and FTP the old one, the new one, on top of the old one. It's because I know where my web config file is. And in any case I know about, you have an FTP way to get to your website. So the easiest way is just FTP the new web config over the old one. Do you have to unzip the file yourself, or does IIS do that for you automatically? No, you didn't see me unzipping that. IIS, when in the importing mechanism, must obviously do that because I didn't do anything except say import, pointed at the zip file, and that's those are Microsoft's instructions for using the new deployment paradigm. So, and I can't believe it's already 9 o'clock. We're having so much fun. Anyway, I want to thank you. Let's see if there's anything I missed in my slides. Yeah, we had a lot of questions, and that's it. Thank you very much. Deployment's a never-ending subject. We always appreciate your questions, and hope to see you again at another webinar. Thank you for attending today.